What if I told you the United States government has known about UFOs for decades, and a president finally admitted it? In 2024, something happened that the UFO community had been waiting 70 years for. Classified files, secret Pentagon programs, whistleblowers risking their careers, and Donald Trump, sitting in the Oval Office, signed an executive order that was supposed to change everything. But here's the question nobody's asking. Did we actually get the truth? Or was this the greatest misdirection in American history? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at the government the same way again. Before we get into Trump, we need to go back, like way back. For decades, the U.S. government had a simple policy on UFOs: deny, dismiss, ridicule. If a pilot reported a UFO, they were quietly told to forget about it. If a civilian filmed something unexplainable, it was labeled a weather balloon. And if a scientist took it seriously, their career was over. That was the deal. And it worked for a while. But in 2017, everything cracked open. The New York Times published a bombshell investigation revealing that the Pentagon had been running a secret UFO investigation unit called AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, hidden inside the Department of Defense with a $22 million black budget. The man who ran it, Luis Elizondo, resigned in protest. He said he couldn't stay silent any longer. His words were chilling. I'm not saying we're not alone in the universe. I'm saying there are objects flying in restricted U.S. airspace that we cannot explain, and nobody at the top seems to care. Then came the videos. 3 declassified Navy videos, codenamed FLIR 1, Gimbal, and Go Fast, showed objects moving at impossible speeds, with no wings, no exhaust, performing maneuvers that no known aircraft can do. These weren't shaky home videos. These were official U.S. military targeting camera recordings. The internet exploded, and suddenly, for the first time in modern history, UFOs weren't a joke anymore. That set the stage for what was coming, and for the role one very controversial president would play in the biggest disclosure story of our time. Now, let's talk about Trump. When Donald Trump first took office in 2017, the UFO conversation was heating up. Congress was starting to ask questions. The AATIP revelations had just gone public, and the American people wanted answers. So what did Trump do? Publicly? Almost nothing. In a 2019 interview, a reporter asked him directly, "Do you believe in UFOs?" Trump paused, smirked, and said, and I quote, "I did have one very brief meeting on it. People are saying they're seeing UFOs. Do I believe it? Not particularly." Classic Trump, non-committal, vague, playing dumb. But then, in the very last days of his first term, something extraordinary happened. In December 2020, Trump signed the COVID-19 omnibus spending bill into law. Buried inside that massive legislation was a mandate. The Director of National Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense had 180 days to produce an unclassified report on UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. This was the first time in U.S. history that Congress formally required the intelligence community to report on UFOs. Some people called it a throwaway provision. Others saw it as the crack in the dam. The report was released in June 2021, and it was stunning, not for what it confirmed, but for what it admitted. Of 144 UAP incidents analyzed, they could only explain one. The other 143 remained unexplained. The report acknowledged that some of these objects posed a potential threat to national security. It admitted pilots were reluctant to report sightings for fear of ridicule, and it called for more funding, more transparency, and more investigation. America had never seen anything like it, and Trump, the man who signed the provision into law, was watching from Mar-a-Lago. Now here's where the story gets really wild. In 2023, a man named David Grusch, a decorated Air Force intelligence officer and former National Reconnaissance Office representative, walked into a congressional hearing room and said something that shook the entire world. Under oath, on camera, in front of Congress, he claimed the United States government has been secretly operating a program to retrieve and reverse engineer non-human craft that were not made by any human civilization. He said he had personally interviewed people with direct knowledge of these programs. He said he had been denied access to these programs himself, despite having the highest levels of security clearance. And he said that people who tried to come forward had been threatened, intimidated, and harassed. Congressman Tim Burchett responded live on air, "I believe him. I think he's credible. And I think there's a lot more to come." The Pentagon responded the way the Pentagon always responds, by saying they found no verifiable evidence to support his claims. But here's what they didn't say. They didn't call him a liar. They didn't say his claims were false. They said unverified. There's a difference. Meanwhile, other whistleblowers were coming forward. Navy pilots who had encountered objects that jammed their radar systems, intelligence officers describing crash retrieval programs that went back to the 1940s. And in 2024, Congress quietly passed the UAP Disclosure Act, modeled after the JFK Records Act, which would have forced the government to hand over classified UFO files to a review board. Would have, because at the last minute, key provisions were stripped out, watered down, buried. Someone didn't want those files to come out. And that's when Trump stepped back into the picture. Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, and this time UFOs were on the agenda. During his campaign, Trump had made hints. He told podcaster Joe Rogan that there were things I know that you wouldn't even believe. He referenced a conversation he said he'd had with someone who'd seen something extraordinary, and he suggested that, if elected, he might push for more transparency. The UFO community went electric. Then in February 2025 it happened. Trump signed a sweeping executive order on government transparency, and buried inside it was a section on UAP files. It directed relevant agencies to conduct a review of classified UAP-related records and assess what could be declassified. Headlines screamed, "Trump orders UFO disclosure," and the internet lost its mind. But here's what the headlines missed. The order didn't mandate release. It mandated review. It set up a process. It created committees. It tasked agencies with deciding what, if anything, should be made public. In Washington, that's what delay looks like. UFO researcher and journalist Ross Coulthart called it a step in the right direction, but nowhere near what the whistleblowers asked for. Congressman Tim Burchett was more blunt. They're still hiding the ball. So what actually came out? Some additional Navy encounter reports, a handful of previously classified incident logs from the 1990s, confirmation that certain investigation programs had existed. But the big stuff, crash retrievals, non-human craft, the programs Grusch described, none of that was confirmed. None of it was released. Was Trump in on the cover-up? Or was he genuinely being stonewalled by the deep state apparatus he'd been fighting for years? That's the question that divides the UFO community right down the middle. Now look, and I want to be fair here, because not everyone is convinced. There are serious, credible people who believe this entire narrative, the whistleblowers, the congressional hearings, the executive orders, is either exaggerated, misinterpreted, or being actively used for political purposes. Physicist Sean Carroll has pointed out that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and so far, we've had testimony. Lots of testimony, but no physical evidence that's been publicly verified. National security journalist Amy Ziegart argues that the real reason governments don't explain UAP sightings isn't because they're hiding aliens. It's because many of these objects may be adversarial foreign drones or classified U.S. technology that they can't reveal without tipping off adversaries. And some political analysts see Trump's embrace of UFO disclosure as a very deliberate play, a way to appeal to a massive online audience, generate viral media coverage, and position himself as the president who tells you what the others won't. In other words, great politics. Unclear truth. That's a legitimate reading. But here's the counter-argument, and it's a strong one. If this were pure theater, why are senior intelligence officials, people with nothing to gain and everything to lose, putting their names and careers on the line? Why did the Senate Intelligence Committee in a bipartisan vote take these claims seriously enough to write them into law? And why, if there's nothing to hide, has every single attempt to pass a real disclosure law been quietly gutted at the last minute? Smoke doesn't always mean fire, but this is a lot of smoke. So where does the expert consensus actually land right now, in 2025? Here's a snapshot. NASA, which launched its own UAP study panel in 2023, concluded that UAPs represent a legitimate scientific question that deserves serious study, and that the stigma around the topic has actively harmed data collection. Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb, who led the Galileo project specifically to study UAPs with hard scientific instruments, says his team has detected objects in the atmosphere that don't match known natural or man-made phenomena. He's careful. He's not saying aliens, but he's saying we need to look. Former CIA Director John Brennan said in a 2020 interview that some UAP sightings could involve a phenomenon that we don't yet understand and that, frankly, could involve other types of life. That sentence from a former CIA director would have been career-ending 15 years ago. The Pentagon's own All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, set up to investigate UAPs, has acknowledged receiving reports of what they termed objects of unknown origin operating near sensitive military installations. They say investigation is ongoing, and Congress, which rarely agrees on anything, has shown rare bipartisan interest in this topic, with both Republicans and Democrats pushing for more disclosure. The consensus isn't aliens are here. The consensus is something unexplained is happening. The government knows more than it's saying, and the American people deserve answers. That, in 2025, is where we stand. Let's zoom out for a second. Whether you believe the whistleblowers or the skeptics, whether you think Trump is a disclosure hero or a political opportunist, there's a bigger story here. For the first time in modern history, the question of whether humanity is alone in the universe is being treated as a serious geopolitical and national security issue. That is extraordinary. Think about what it means if even a fraction of what's been alleged is true. Non-human craft recovered by the U.S. government. Technology so advanced it defies our understanding of physics. Programs so secret that elected officials with top-level clearance can't access them. It would mean that the most significant discovery in human history has been hidden from the public for decades. It would rewrite science. It would reshape religion. It would fundamentally change how we understand our place in the universe. And it would mean that a handful of unelected bureaucrats inside programs nobody voted for with budgets nobody approved have been making that decision for all of us. That's not just a UFO story. That's a democracy story. And that's why this matters, whether the objects are from another planet, another dimension, or a rival superpower's secret weapons program. The American people deserve to know what's flying in their skies. And so far they don't. So, what do you think? Is Trump the president who finally cracked open the biggest secret in human history? Or is this all elaborate political theater designed to distract and delay? I want to know your take. Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. If this video made you think differently about UFOs, government transparency, or what we're actually being told, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who deserve to see this information. And if you want to go deeper, I've got a full video on the David Grusch testimony breaking down exactly what he said, what the government's response was, and what it means for the future of disclosure. Links in the description. I'll see you there.